Stu Fulton here in Japan, sending you the best news, reviews, previews, interviews, all the views from the land of the rising sun, pro wrestling, pro grappling, kickboxing, mixed martial arts, and especially a focus on those who are responsible for releasing the Kraken. This is Kraken Chronicles. Stu Fulton here in Japan, and you are watching Kraken Chronicles. Let me introduce an old friend, somebody who I've trained with on occasions, and a man who has cornered me on occasions in the past, Keith Vargo. Keith Vargo is a writer, a martial artist, a researcher, known for his work in combat sports journalism and martial arts philosophy. He has written extensively for Black Belt magazine and other martial arts publications, one of the few in the world to explore topics related to training, competition, and the deeper mental and philosophical aspects of combat sports. Keith, welcome to Kraken Chronicles.
Hey Stu, it's really good to be here.
Yeah, we have so many things to talk about going way back to the early 2000s. You and I have been in Japan for that long. Today, I really want to focus on kicking off the second season with a time that you and I will remember very clearly. Pride 21 Demolition, which took place at June of 2002 in the Saitama Super Arena. One of the most famous brawls in MMA history. It was just something else that day, the main event of the card.
Yeah, it's roundly regarded as one of the best fights of all time. You know, Don Frye versus Yoshihiro Takayama.
Yeah, it was something special that day, and it was a fight that wasn't supposed to happen. It was a rebooking, right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, to me, that's the key to this, the whole thing, like why this fight was so great is, well, okay, just first of all, you know, who Don Frye was. You know, Frye was that guy. You know, he was this legend. He was the most masculine guy in MMA, right? And, you know, he was just a legend from the 90s. You know, that he did, you know, 3 8-man tournaments in 1 year. Like 3, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, like there's nobody. No, like most guys did 1 if they did any, you know, and no, he did 3, and he was in the finals of every one of them, right? And his only loss before coming into Takayama Frye was against a prime Mark Coleman in the finals of one of them. And so, you know, he's this legend coming into this fight, and this was supposed to be his retirement fight. You know, that he was like, I'm gonna fight Coleman, I'm gonna avenge that loss, and then I'm gonna ride off in the sunset and just be a pro wrestler, you know. And Takayama, and then, well, then Coleman has to drop out of the fight, and Takayama, he just took up the fight. Like they were asking around trying to find somebody, and he took up the challenge 2 weeks before. He said, I'll fight Frye. And that's the thing, is that, you know, Frye came into this fight like, this is my last fight, and he's going to give it everything. And actually, this is something I've been wondering what you thought about this, is that I've been thinking about this, you know, because we were talking about doing this podcast. Like, I suspect that Takayama might have known something that we didn't going into that fight, because, you know, he was mainly a pro wrestler, and Frye had done pro wrestling, and what none of the rest of us knew was that Frye had some health problems. You know, like he had some real bad back pain, and he wasn't the same guy who won those 3 tournaments in 1 year. And, you know, wrestling as a community, I thought he might have caught wind that he's like, you know, maybe I can beat Frye now, you know, and that he came to that fight where, like, I got an opportunity. And, you know, when you look at that stare down now and you think about that, like, I kind of wonder about that, you know, where like, you know, like Frye's looking at him like, this is it. This is my last fight. And Takayama's looking at him like, this is my chance to beat the legend and become immortal in pro wrestling, you know?
Well, to be fair, Takayama, he never really looked scared of anyone. I mean, he was an imposing figure. The bigger of the two, 6'5", This is a guy that used to put his hands on the top ropes, squeeze the second rope, and just step over.
Yeah, it was, and in Japan, like most guys here are a foot shorter and they're pretty narrow, and it's like he was just this massive giant here. And like that's sort of like you said, it looked like he's like getting on a horse, stepping over that top rope. Like,
yeah, I mean, even just him getting in the ring would have the crowd going, "Whoa!"
Yeah,
that was just the start of it,
and he had, if I remember right, that was his brand, was that no fear, and it was like on all of his shorts and his shirts and everything. It's just no fear. And it was like, well, you think like, well, everybody's got their gimmick. It's like, no, that was who he was, that was his character, and sorry, go ahead.
He was a veteran and legend of pro wrestling world. 1,500 matches or so in his career until he was forced to retire. Originally trained under Nobuhiko Takada. Takada Dojo is where you and I met back in 2001. Yoji Ando had just left, I think. Yoji Ando actually turned out to be Takayama's tag team partner in his pro wrestling debut. That was back in 1996, of course. And Takayama comes from the lineage of Giant Baba when he went over to All Japan Pro Wrestling. And then he went over to Pro Wrestling Noah in 2000. Noah's inaugural show, actually, Takayama, after Mitsuharu Misawa left All Japan with a bunch of other wrestlers. And incidentally, that first ever Pro Wrestling Noah show was aptly named Noah Departure, symbolizing their new journey. So he held multiple titles across various promotions: the GHC heavyweight title in Noah, the IWGP heavyweight title, New Japan Pro Wrestling, the Triple Crown. So Takayama, he's one of just a handful, literally a handful of men to have won the Grand Slam of heavyweight wrestling titles in Japan. So, he was already very well established going into this Pride event, Pride 21. And man, the card itself, just before we get into the fight, Gary Goodridge is on the card, Anderson Silva, Renzo Gracie, Fedor Emelianenko made his pro debut versus Semi Schilt. That one fight that we're talking about today, leaving an indelible mark on the fight entertainment world forever. Don Frye versus Yoshihiro Takayama. This was back when bouts were 20 minutes. I loved those old 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. How about you?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, is 10 minute a round? Like that's like for if you were just like seeing two guys scrap in the street, like that's the fight, but that was the first round, like in a Pride thing. And if you didn't have stamina, there's just no way you made it out of the first round. You had to have great conditioning back then. You really had to, think about what you were doing, and it was like a different kind of strategizing,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we'll get into this in a minute. That's strategy wasn't what this fight was about.
It's not, no. And we've talked before a little bit about the tempo of that fight, how it starts off, the stare down in the center of the ring, and then once it actually starts, they start throwing fists, but it's not completely wild from the get-go. It's like boom, 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 and then they're in the corner, and then you've got that ice hockey fight, basically, where they're holding each other's necks and just smashing the living daylights out of each other with one hand. Now, you and I were not together watching that. We were in the arena, but we didn't see each other at all that day.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where, we had this weird thing where we were often in the same place, but not in the same place back in the day. Like what I was doing, or what I usually did back then when I was reporting on events is, there was like a reporter section, and then there was the backstage area when then, post fight that have the interviews and stuff. And so I would go back and forth between them, so that sometimes I'd be out watching the fights live, and sometimes I'd go backstage. And for that fight, I have this distinct memory of it because I was coming out of that area, and trying to get my way back to the press seat so I can come and watch the main event. And it's just a weird thing. Like at that point, you know, Pride was becoming this thing that you couldn't see in the States because there weren't the pay-per-views and stuff. And there was media, you just kind of descending on the place at that point. And I remember there was like a bunch of reporters like together, or writers, and they were like, hey, where's the press area, that kind of stuff. And they were the guys from Details magazine. You remember that? Like, it was a big men's magazine, and I had to show them where the, you know, the press area was. I remember like, hey, nice to meet you, that kind of thing, get their card. And then I remember getting into the arena as I'm walking down to the press area, just as that was happening, you know, as Takayama Frye was turning into this slugfest, you know.
Yeah,
amazing. But you had the better seat, if I remember right.
Yeah, I was very lucky. I managed to. I wasn't there working that day. I was just in the audience, but I scored some ringside seats. So I was there. Yeah, I was there with a friend, and yeah, it was just one of those fights that you don't expect. I mean, we knew it was going to be explosive because the way the two of them fight, and you know, they're absolute monsters. But as it actually unfolded, the jaws just dropped all around the place, and the excitement was palpable. I mean, if you look at the clip itself, you can see Vanderlei Silva in the back there, ringside, basically just like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, and that's the thing is, you know, to sort of make Vanderlei Silva's jaw drop at the violence of a fight, that's saying something, you know, like, because that's every day for him, and he's watching that going like, oh, this is unbelievable.
that's a seal of approval.
Yeah, straight up.
Yeah. So yeah, 6 minutes 10 seconds of not one but two simultaneous releases of the Kraken. It was it's something that's just going to live forever.
Hey, can I go back for a second? Like, because you mentioned Semi Schilt fighting on this card against Fyodor in his debut.
Yeah.
This is the thing. Coming into this fight, like, Takayama was like on top of the world in pro wrestling. You know, he's a big name guy, right? And you know, he had his MMA debut. Well, I guess it wasn't his debut. I think he fought sometime in the mid '90s against Kimo, but I don't know much about that fight. But really, for all intents and purposes, his debut was against Kazuyuki Fujita, you know, who really, he was Japan's top heavyweight guy. And, you know, he was top 10 in the world back then, right? And that's a big debut, you know, to make. And he did pretty good, right? And so his reward for that, he lost, but, you know, he actually did really good against Fujita and kept that fight competitive. And then they gave him Schilt. And oh man, I hate to say this, but I thought he was a bit like damaged goods then, in, you know, just reputation wise, because, you know, Schilt is monstrous. He's taller than Takayama. He's one of the best, you know, in the heavyweights in that generation, and all the stuff that Takayama does well with that kind of like clinch and knee and, you know, just standing and trading, that kind of stuff, you know, Schilt was better at. And, you know, he just got beat up. And I remembered watching that Schilt fight and thinking like, oh man, I don't think they're going to invite him back. I don't think anybody wants to see that again. Mm-hmm. And then he took this fight with Frye. And, you know, when I talk about like him looking at that opportunity, like when he's looking at Frye, like in that stare down, I swear, like somewhere in his private moments, he has to be like, I'm not going out like that again. You know, yeah. and Frye's like looking back at him, you know, that like, you know, I'm going out on a W. And both of them don't know this is what's going on in each other's mind. You see just them staring down at each other like that, and just like they know in their own minds what they're going to do, but none of the rest of us know. And that's why it turned into this unbelievable surprise kind of thing. You know, that there was no defense. They were going to go in there and eliminate that guy. You know, both of them, maximum offense. You know.
Zero defense. Yeah. Takayama, well, both of them, but they are really, you know, two incredible warriors. And, you know, they were known for just going out on their shield. back then in Pride, you know, your record didn't really matter so much at all. It was about how you fought, the heart you showed, the pulling out of that inner warrior, you know, the releasing of the Kraken. That's what people wanted to see. And I think that's a huge difference between the way it is now in the UFC, where numbers are so important. You know, this guy's 7-0, or you know, 9-2, and you know, people get very caught up on those numbers. But back then, some of those magical fights, the numbers meant zero.
And you know, there's something we've talked about before, you know, in private, that there was this bit of a gambling mentality back then that, you know, some of these matches you're like, yeah, I don't know about that, you know, like you know, like it seems like a mismatch, like one guy is, you know, better than the other, like, and you look at their records, like you said, that they didn't think about the records. They thought, you know, this guy he's getting his chance, you know, and kind of, and you know, Takayama had a big reputation. He was gambling with it some there, you know, and and that's the thing. That's part of the edge of the fight, was like, maybe he can pull this out, you know, because he's fighting with this legend, you know, of the UFC, you know, and yeah, that's part of the whole thing back then, was like, you know, the storyline of, you know, can he pull it out?
Well, those mismatches were by design. I mean, that's how the management set the whole thing up. The concept of a slightly unfair fight was what made the magic. That's how they went about it. The underdog, you know, Sakuraba versus Vanderlei Silva, the trilogy, you know, it was always that. Can he get him this time, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like, we all, someday we're gonna have to do an episode on that, but yeah, the main thing with those guys was, we all knew Sakuraba was good enough to beat him, but he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't get that little extra in there and win, right? And there was always different ways he would lose, but he ended up losing. But he always had his moments in every fight where you're like, even in the first one, you know, where, you know, Silva's just marching in there, and Sakuraba, you'll see like this brief clip where he'll just like counter punch between these wild hooks, and he buckles Silva's knees, and Silva has to do a defensive shoot on him, you know. And I kind of think, like, to that point, like, Takayama's like this, because at the very beginning of the fight, because I rewatched this before we were going to talk about this, and I totally forgotten about this, that at the very beginning they just step in and punch at each other, and Frye ducks Takayama's first punch and just smashes him dead in the grill, right? And you think like, oh, well, this is over. He's just going to be bam, bam, bam. It's going to be done. But then like the next punch, or maybe the second punch after that Takayama throws, he hits Frye, and you see Frye's legs just kind of go whoop, kind of sideways, like, you know, just kind of not buckles his knees, but kind of like knocks him like off balance sideways. And suddenly Frye realizes, oh, this is serious. You know, I'm not going to steamroll this guy. And that's what leads into the hockey fight moment kind of thing.
Yeah. What was beautiful after the fight as well, the show of respect the two of them had for each other. And that still goes on to today.
Oh, yeah. You know, both of those guys have had some serious health problems. And, honestly, you know, although Takayama went on to a greater pro wrestling career, you know, neither of them are really the same after this fight. It really took something out of both of them, because, you know, Frye didn't win another fight for 4 years. You know, he got lots of fights because, you know, this fight was, you know, just this all-time great fight. And so everybody's like, well, let's have some more of that. And they kept matching him up with other guys. And, you know, it really took something out of him, you know, and he couldn't pull it out. And, you know, Takayama had gone through, if I remember right, even though he was just mainly doing pro wrestling at that point, I think he'd suffered a stroke, but he recovered from it, came back to pro wrestling, and then he had his spinal injury years later. But he never won another. Oh, no, he won one more MMA match, I think, after that. But he also just was, you know, both of them. It took a lot out of both of them. You know?
Yeah. Well, Takayama, his MMA debut was against Kazuyuki Fujita, of all people. Fujita, now we need to do another episode on this one, because Fujita was one of the first guys to rock Fedor Emelianenko in the ring. We hadn't seen him wobbled at all. So yeah, we need to come back to that. Let's bookmark that one. But ultimately, after that fight with Takayama, Takayama, I think he had one more fight against Bob Sapp in 2003, but like you said, he focused more on his pro wrestling career, which unfortunately ended abruptly in 2017 in a 6-man tag team match. He was trying to do a sunset flip, landed on his head and neck terribly, and has been left quadriplegic since. Severe cervical spine cord injury. Since then, there's been the formation of the Takayama Foundation, and every year they do a Takayamania wrestling show for him. In fact, the last one was really, really moving just last year there. You had Minoru Suzuki in the ring, and they had Takayama in the ring in his chair, and Suzuki was in full murder granddad mode. He's like, "Come on, get up, you asshole, get up!" And everybody knows that Takayama can't get up. He's in his chair, and you can see him moving like that, and like his eyes are all glazing up. And Suzuki stays in character, but there's guys in the background just absolutely in bits, because they know what this means. Everybody watching that knew the deep roots of the martial arts and the pro wrestling and how they're intertwined, and how, of course, Takayama's not going to get up and fight in the ring, but the fact that he's trying is the beauty of it.
Yeah, like I remember the big thing about that was that he was in the ring at all, and that his goal had been, his stated goal was he wants to recover and he wants to get back in the ring. And, the truth of what I read about his injury was that wasn't going to happen. That he was not going to get back to what he was before. Even though he's got that attitude of like, I'm going to do it, right? And to be fair, like when you see him, he is actually moving his body a little bit, and you can see him actually he flails his fingers up and down, and that's actually kind of some big progress for a guy who couldn't move anything from the shoulders down, right?
Yeah. There was a photo just the other day on the internet of Takayama sitting up by himself. I think he had his hands strapped to a bar, and he began to slouch after a while, but he was actually sitting up for a short time himself. So I mean, that in itself is huge.
Yeah, and that was the symbolic thing of putting him in that ring. It was like, I remember that because I saw that on the fight meeting here, where they took down all the ropes from the sides, and they picked up his chair and they put him in the ring, and it was just this perfect moment of just him and Suzuki, facing each other, and everybody knows the reality of the situation, but pro wrestling is the story itself, right? Mm-hmm. And the drama, and that his personal drama of his fight for recovery, and that's sort of the interaction in the ring with one of his another pro wrestler that he has a long history with. And it was actually pretty moving. I remember that. And it's hard to really sum up, but the main thing was that just he was there and he was in the ring again, and it was just, oh man, it was, you said, it was like the whole way around. You see everybody just really getting really emotional about it. It was something,
Yeah. And Don Frye himself, going back to the MMA side of things, visited him in hospital in 2019. Another beautiful moment to watch that exchange between the two guys so many years after that massively symbolic fight they had. It was beautiful.
I mean, both of them know that 50, 100 years from now, whatever else they've done, like that fight, that clip, as long as media exists, that's going to be one that's going to be shown as what what MMA was like, what Pride was like, you know, what that special moment that was the Kakutogi Boom was. That special intersection of professional wrestling and you know, world-class fighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and when they meet together, it's like they know who they are. They know the historical import that fight has, and on each other, you know, they're tied together forever for that. And there's this really wonderful moment where, you know, Frye's talking about his own personal struggles, because he had unbelievable back problems, you know, where I think he had like rods in his back, and there was a medically induced coma and all this other kind of stuff, and just god awful kind of injuries and pain that he went through. And he's talking with Takayama and saying like this sort of gambare kind of, you know, keep on keeping on, do your best kind of thing. And he was saying that part of what got him through that was thinking of their fight together, and that it was, I remember the distinct quote as he said it was the last time he really felt alive was in that fight. And man, that's why that hit me just oh boom, like, you know, as a fight guy, I was like, well, yeah. And I could see it, you know, because not very few of us will ever have that kind of experience, you know, I mean, any experience fighting, let alone that kind of experience where you're in a historical moment, being one of two people fighting the best fight of your life, you know. And it was just this perfect tying together of two ends of, you know, them back then, you know, doing their best to just really try and win that fight. And I can't emphasize that enough. Is like there was no offense, no defense in that fight, because as soon as they grabbed each other, every punch was them trying to finish it. And just like any one of those punches could have knocked the other guy out. And they're both just gambling with it, like, I'm gonna outlast you, you know, and just like bam, and as they're taking one over and over, and you're just watching it like, how can it go on? And it does, and it keeps going on, and both of them are too tough to go down. And then, you know, you cut to that later, you know, this, you know, Takayama in his hospital bed struggling to get back, and Frye talking about struggling to get through his health problems. And it's just like those two moments tied together. Oh, it was this perfect moment of like of TV and sports history, seeing them together again after those years. The whole thing, even since the fight, you know, the accident with Takayama and Frye's health troubles, it really, it just shows us how massive symbols of resilience they are. You know, they've inspired generations of fighters, and two men that can truly release the Kraken. And the amazing thing is, you know, that fight itself, anybody, you know, any young people watching around the world on the internet, that fight is thrilling in itself, just watching on a screen. But you and I were actually in the venue in Saitama Super Arena, and the electricity of it, the vibe, the feeling was something I'll never forget. Oh yeah. I mean, because it hit so many of those marks. You know, like I said, I think part of it was just the fact that it was all offense, because both of them were like, you know, I'm going to beat this guy, and it's like this sheer act of will and offense, right? But also it had some of those moments where it's like they go through the hockey fight moment where they're just holding each other, and they both just get a little tired, right? And then there's this brief moment where Takayama gets that over under, and you know, probably does the best wrestling throw in his career on Frye, and does this lateral drop, and he's like, oh damn, he threw Frye, you know. and then, you know, Frye's like, oh, you know, clearly realizing, you know, I'm tired, I got to get off the ground kind of thing, you know, I can't let this guy on top of me and pound me. And as he's trying to get up, you know, you see Takayama with another one of those perfect MMA moments. He actually rises up a little ahead of him and just tries to knee his head off, you know. and there's this moment, and then they're back up against the ropes, and it's hockey fight again, and I remember being there in the venue, and it was just like, you see one, the hockey fight, throw, and it's like unbelievable, like just like pro wrestling, right? And then right back to MMA, and it's like, oh Jesus, like he just missed Frye's head. You watch it in slow motion, you'll see like it hits him right in the shoulder, and boy was Frye lucky it hit him in the shoulder, because Takayama, whatever other technique he had, that was his thing. He had really powerful knees, and Frye just by this much, it misses him and it hits him right in the shoulder, and then they're back at it again. I remember just in the crowd, it was just like, yeah, huh? Just these brief pauses. What happened again? Oh my God!
Yeah. Well, honestly, what an amazing slice of history that was, and we could go on all day about this. And the show itself, that was just the main event. We should revisit this. But speaking of slices of history, one of your latest books, Kakutogi Boom. Kakutogi means basically fighting arts or martial arts, and you have just released a new book. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So this was originally going to be one giant book, but I decided to start releasing it in parts, and it's called Kakutogi Boom. Kakutogi being fighting sports, and the boom was that special era. From roughly the mid '90s to the mid 2000s. Where that we were involved in. The reason we kind of got involved in fight sports here was because of that. It was just this unbelievable time, where we had Pride and K1 and Inoki's various shows like all running at once, and there was just a huge amount of like attention and money and celebrity and all this stuff just piled into the fighting sports at the time. So I was writing for Black Belt at the time, and I have a whole bunch of old fight writing from the time that I'm compiling into my current books, and volume 1 is out now of Kakutogi Boom, and it's got some like prologue information. So if you don't know anything about those times or about Japan, there's some essays in there, talking about what made the time what it was, and there's a bunch of profiles of fighters like Mirko Filipovic, Bob Sapp, Tsuyoshi Kosaka, like all these guys, right? And well, not all of them, but a lot of them. And then I got another volume coming out this year. Volume 2 is going to be all the fight reports like Takayama Frye, and this edition of Pride, that is my report from that time, is going to be in that book coming out this year. And there'll be another volume, The Aftermath, will be coming in 2026.
Good stuff. Yeah, so any of the viewers or listeners on this show today, click on that link if you're interested. You will get some amazing insights from Keith on that whole time, which shaped hugely the way mixed martial arts is today in the West and around the world. Also, if you like this content, hit that like button, and if you press subscribe, I will be your friend forever. So get on the YouTube, follow us on your choice of social media, and we can get more of these cracking stories out there. Keith, thank you very much for joining me today on Kraken Chronicles.
It's a pleasure, man. Hope we can do this again sometime.
Certainly.